Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this webinar on consolidated advice pilots as part of the ACT-EU program, the Priority Action 7. My name is Yordanis Gravanis. I am from the Scientific Advice Office of the EMA. We're very excited to have started these two pilots a little over a month ago on the 10th of June. And I would like to let you know that because we're broadcasting live today, you will have the opportunity to provide input, comments, questions through the Slido, and the information about connecting to Slido is on screen now. We will repeat this information during the webinar, in case you have no opportunity to take down, to take note of the information right now. And I would like to invite my colleagues, Laura Piopov, who's the ACT-EU Program Manager from the EMA, also Paolo Foggi, who is the Scientific Advice Working Party Chair, and Marianne Lunzer, who is co-chair of the CTCG, the Clinical Trials Coordination Group, to give some opening remarks and set the scene for today's webinar. So Laura, over to you.
Thank you very much, Yordanis, and good afternoon. Just a couple of slides about ACT-EU to refresh our memories and focus on the purpose of the initiative. This is an initiative led by the EMA, the Heads of Medicine Agency, and the European Commission, including DG Santé and DG RTD. It was launched in January 2022, building on the momentum of the implementation of the CTR. So exactly the same months when we launched CITES and the clinical trials regulation became applicable, we also published the paper defining the structure and scope of ACT-EU. So almost 2.5 years ago. The vision is to have better, faster, and optimized clinical trials in the European Union. In this way, rendering the EU a favorable environment to conduct clinical research. We have different priority actions, different work streams, and our work is illustrated in the ACT-EU work plan. And in this slide, you have the link. This is a document published on the ACT-EU website. The latest version is from November last year, and towards the end of this year of 2024, we will provide an updated version, also reflecting the input that we are receiving from our stakeholders through, for example, the multi-stakeholder platform advisory group. The objective for today is to inform you on the activities under the priority action that is looking at the consolidated advice on clinical trials. We have 2 pilots launched on the 10th of June. One focused on the scientific aspect, bringing together SOP and CTCG, and the other one focused on regulatory aspect managed by the CTCG about pre-CTA. Next slide, please. This is an overview of the different priority actions under ACT-EU. This is taken from the work plan covering the period of time 2023, so from last year until 2026. Just to give you a flavor of our working areas, and considering that we have members from the European Commission, from CTCG, the member states and the EMA working on these work streams. So the first priority action is on mapping and governance to illustrate the different groups, some of them coordinated by the Commission, some by the agency, others by HMA, the different actors working in the clinical trials landscape. The second priority action is specific on the implementation of the CTR. If we think about the transition of clinical trials from CTD to CTR, transparency aspect, monitoring the number of applications that we receive every month, and there is a dedicated work stream on support to non-commercial sponsors to have more multinational clinical trials. Then we have the platform, the multi-stakeholder platform, and the establishment of the advisory group. A dedicated work stream on the revision of GCP, ICH E6R3, so GCP modernization, then clinical trials analytics, the work stream on consolidated advice on clinical trials, so the focus of the webinar today, and then clinical trial methodologies, safety, training, and the last priority action that has been created to address particularly clinical trials in public health emergency settings, so following the lesson learned after the COVID pandemic. So this is to give you an idea of the different activities under ACT-EU, and with this I'll give the floor to Paolo then for the next opening remarks. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Laura, and all many thanks for joining this webinar. One of the objectives today is to present to you the SOAP-CTCG Consolidated Scientific Advice Pilot that was launched in June, and that is about to start with the first procedure starting in the next weeks. As chair of the SOAP, let me tell you that I'm very happy and proud to have it now starting. And I would like to express my gratitude to all the colleagues that worked for reaching this objective. And by the way, we already started to receive applications. This is something new in the current EU and landscape. For the first time, we will have around the table the SOAP CHMP experts looking at the requirements for the marketing authorization, and the NCA people looking at the clinical trial application to discuss with the applicants their proposed development. And we expect this being a plus for you, for applicants, compared to the current offer, since for once there will be the opportunity to get a feedback at the same time on the adequacy of the proposal to support the clinical trial application and to support a centralized marketing authorization. We also believe that such an approach, by increasing the opportunity for view exchanges and mutual understanding between SOAP CHMP experts and CTCG and CAA regulatory expert, fully acknowledging the respective remits and full independence, of course, but will in the end increase the chances to reach harmonized position. And this hopefully could make the EU a more attractive environment for developers. I would say that we also hope that by speaking one voice as regulators, this may put ourselves in a stronger position to convince you to follow our advices. But let's see. And it's up to all of us, the applicants and regulators, to make the best use of this opportunity. It's a pilot, and we will learn by doing. We are targeting a minimum of one procedure for a month. Then let's see if we will take more. What I can tell you, I guess, that we are all very excited to start. Today, you will hear all the details needed to understand how practically it is supposed to work, what's in scope, how to submit, timelines, output, and things like that. I guess that we will also try to clarify how this consolidated SOAP-CTCG advice is placed within the landscape of all scientific advice activities across EU, because I guess it is important also to target the right procedure that fits better with what you're looking at. And also, I guess that we will mention then, being a pilot, we will assess then the results, and we will also ask for your feedback at the end, and it will be very important, of course. So I think that all of this will be clearly explained, and in the end, we will also be happy to take questions and clarify all your doubts. So, hoping that this will be a very fruitful meeting, I think now I can hand over to Marianne.
Thank you, Paolo, and good afternoon, and thanks for your interest in in basically the 2 pilots that we are offering. As Paolo already said, the 2 pilots are there to clarify the needs before submission is initiated, so to say, and also to align across Europe our expectations towards the submission package, both across member states and across different institutions, so to say. You will find information on the 2 pilots, also with reference to the pre-existing advice and scientific advice offer in a mapping, and you can see on the slide where you can find the compiled information. So perhaps then just a few words on the pre-CTA advice. In contrast to the SOLP CTCG advice, the pre-CTA advice is just focusing only on regulatory and technical aspects. You will hear more on the different topics that we think might be in scope of a pre-CTA advice. But I would like to start with a bit of a background why we came up with this proposal in the first place. And this was following conversations with sponsors in different meetings where they expressed concern that the direct communication with authorities and with the national competent authorities and with the ethics committees that they were used to under the directive, they were now missing under the CTR with the strict timelines and with the basically with the very strict framework which is present within CTIS. And there were some expectations in relation to a future offer, which was above all a very rapid turnaround time, because the anticipation was that they would already, or you would already be more or less prepared for the submission, and then there might be a few questions that require additional clarification before you would be happy to submit your application. And basically, we expect to have submissions in relation to complex regulatory aspects where no guidance documents are published so far, or where the existing guidance does not cover your situation completely. So this would be more or less the cases that we are expecting to receive as requests via this channel. Then we had quite extensive discussions at CTCG and also nationally, I think all of us, if the resource situation would allow yet another scientific or other advice format. So the discussions were in relation to both formats. And therefore, it took a while until we were ready to come forward with this now, I think, rather mature pilot proposals. For the pre-CTA, the novelty is that before you could, of course, go to each individual member state and ask for regulatory advice before the submission there. And now, for the first time, we are offering a consolidated advice going across the different member states. We have allocated weekly slots for those discussions, and thereby we can ensure the short turnaround time, because we don't have to bother too much with organizational aspects. And the entry point is via the SNSA, but more details will follow later on in the detailed presentations. One point where I would like to manage expectations is the involvement of the ethics committees. That was another clear request before we were initiating the discussions. But currently, there is some complexity in inviting, so to say, ethics committees who are independent bodies into those kinds of discussions, but we will, on a case-by-case basis, perhaps be able to reach out to them if it is relevant or if it is perceived as relevant by the individual member state, and if in this member state the ethics committees are happy to join such an activity. But otherwise, I think we have more or less met your expectations, hopefully. So over to the colleagues to present more details. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Laura, Paolo, and Marianne, for this very, I have to say, insightful background that you gave us already. Quite a few considerations and things that went into the design of these pilots. But now I think it's time to delve into the details, and we're going to take the two pilots one after the other. We're going to start with the SOP CTCG Consolidated Scientific Advice. And we'll have first a presentation by Jane Mosley, who is a scientific officer working at the Scientific Advice Office at the EMA, but she's also one of the co-leads for the Priority Action 7 on Consolidated Scientific Advice. So Jane, over to you.
Thanks very much. So I have 20 minutes to give you the details of the SOP CTCG pilot. And I have broken it down into a number of sections, as you can see here on the slide. So what is new and the context versus other offerings in the overview, and then also going into the details of the scope, the submission process and fees, the actual process itself, but at a high level. And then just to recap, and you'll also be pointed to areas for further information at the end of the whole presentation. Let's start. Next slide, please. Yeah. So on this slide, you can see at a glance some of the key features of the SOP CTCG pilot on scientific advice. It's very much, it's orientated to scientific advice on the suitability of clinical trial design to support the marketing authorization and the clinical trial application. It involves the Scientific Advice Working Party and the Clinical Trial Coordination Group to aim to have a harmonized view on these requirements. The application is through the established Scientific Advice Working Party Scientific Advice Procedure, but with a justification. The normal fees apply, and the fee structure and the incentives. And we're looking at 10 cases in the pilot, approximately 1 per month for 10 months. And we'll go through all of these in more details. Next slide, please. Now, I have put in a couple of slides on the two groups, just to make sure that everybody is starting from the same point. And I'm not assuming that everybody knows everything about these groups, but just to give you an overview from the Scientific Advice Working Party. So this is a standing working party for CHMP, the Committee on Medicinal Products for Human Use at the EMA. And this working party has a remit of providing scientific advice. The group meets 11 times a year, so there's no meeting in August. And we have 72 members and alternates, which are nominated based on expertise and include representatives from EMA committees. Now, for each scientific advice procedure, and also I would include in this the protocol assistance, which is also advice for diseases which have an orphan designation, rare disease, there are 2 delegates which are appointed as coordinators, and also a member is appointed as a peer reviewer. We also involve other committees and working parties and other operational groups for peer review input, and you can check the mandate from the SOP. So for the next slide, again, just a few points on the Clinical Trial Coordination Group. And you can also find the details of this on the Heads of Medicines Agency and the mandate there as well. So this is a working group of the Heads of Medicines Agencies for experts on the classification, assessment and oversight of clinical trials from the national agencies. And the objectives of the CTCG are for the harmonization and optimization of the regulatory environment, ensuring the protection of rights, safety and well-being of the subjects, and the generation of robust data. CTCG will monitor trends and publish guidance. And as I said, the mandate is available. So these are the two groups that we are talking about in the SOAP CTCG pilot principally. Next slide, please. So what's new in this SOAP CTCG procedure? So as you've heard already, this particular pilot is a new interaction, a new regulatory interaction between the SOAP and the CG, and the CTCG. Okay, and it will therefore consider from the SOAP and CHMP perspective, the draft clinical trial design from the perspective of the marketing authorization application, the range of studies, for example, the endpoints and the data that we need to in order for CHMP to be able to evaluate the data and to have an informed risk-benefit decision for the product at the time of marketing authorization application. Now, individual member states will consider the draft clinical trial design from the perspective of the clinical trial application. And as I said, CTCG is a coordinating group for member states. So with this in mind, these are two closely related questions on the same trial, which is why it's important to give scientific advice together to minimize avoidable divergences in the perspectives and in the advice. Next slide, please. A question that we're getting a lot is, how does this pilot fit within the landscape of all EU advice activities? Now, there are multiple avenues for seeking advice from regulators in the European Medicines Regulatory Network. And these have been mapped and published on the ACT EU website. And the hyperlinks in the slides will take you directly to that mapping. Our advice is to seek advice according to the remit of the group and the nature of the topic on which you need to seek advice. Today, we're not going to go through in detail all of the different offerings that are available, because this would be a webinar in itself in order to do full justice to the different nuances involved in the different offerings. But I think today what you need to take away is that the SOAP CTCG pilot is a consolidated scientific advice on the clinical trial application requirements, which are from the member state remit, and the marketing authorization evidence requirement, which is a centralized scientific advice remit. And this is a new offering, a new perspective. So next slide, please. Okay, so going on to more aspects such as the scope and the applicant's justification. Next slide, please. What are the cases in scope for the SOAP CTCG pilot? We have divided these into essential criteria, which you see on the slide here, and in the next slide we'll have more desirable criteria. So when we look at the cases which have requested admission to the SOAP CTCG pilot, these are what we will consider. So first off, for the essential criteria, we would like to prioritize trials which have a multinational clinical trial across 2 or more EU member states. The proposed reporting member state should be known. And we need a justification why it should be included and prioritized in the pilot. So we would like you to tell us why you think that there is a scientific and methodological clinical trial topic that requires both the SOAP CHMP and the CTCG feedback. We recognize that questions could be at a more strategic, conceptual level, or also at a detailed level. And also then we would like you to tell us what is the medical need for the proposed medicinal product, why is it of public health benefit, and this is what we'd like to know. Next slide. In terms of desirable criteria for cases, which we will take into account for the prioritization, we are saying here that an advanced mature protocol of the clinical trial is preferred. So this would be prioritized potentially. And we would also say that the proposed concerned member states are known. And the following features of the trial, or the indication or the program, will be considered. For example, if it's a rare disease or an advanced therapy, it has a PRIME designation, complex trials with or without pediatric issues, highly decentralized trials, academic sponsors, or potentially a clinical trial application which was rejected and the trial requires a redesign. So we don't have quotas for numbers of cases in these different categories, but we will look in the round and see what are the features of the case in question, and we will consider them in a prioritization step. And I'll mention this in the process later on. Please note that the SOAP will also engage with other EMA groups and the Committee on Advanced Therapies, for example, or the Pediatric Committee as needed. And this is in line with our usual practice. So if it is a complex clinical trial with a pediatric element, then we would, for example, engage with the Pediatric Committee. Okay, next slide, please. I want to highlight a number of points where issues are out of scope of the SOAP and CTCG pilot. Firstly, cases which fall under the Emergency Task Force for declared or potential public health emergencies are out of scope. And the reason for this is because within the ETF, there are also some interactions with the CTCG in this context. A formal consultation with ethics committee or ethics expert is also out of scope in this SOAP CTCG pilot. We will not admit questions where there is a regulatory or technical question about the CTA preparation, because this will be more suited to the pre-CTA pilot, and you'll hear more about that later. We will not admit questions which are about pre-assessment of data to support marketing authorization or clinical trial application. And then combination device type of questions also are out of scope at this stage. Because this is a new initiative, there's a lot to be done and developed, and we need to keep things certainly manageable from a complexity point of view at the starting point. And next slide, please. Okay, so I want to go through the application process. Next slide. So this slide is about how you would normally submit a scientific advice request. So in ordinary circumstances, if you're requesting scientific advice from SOAP and SOAP CHMP, you put your application through our online platform called IRIS, and guidance is available for this. And in the blue box here, there is a lot of information about the guidance. I'm not going to go through this today, but it's all available for you to look at. But this is the normal scientific advice process for applications. And on the bottom of the slide here, I have also highlighted for you monthly submission slots. So when you request scientific advice, we have monthly deadlines, and the cases are then accumulated in the monthly slot for the dates. And you now have the 2025 dates and the remaining dates of 2024, and also a link to the scientific advice webpage. Now, the reason I'm telling you all about the standard scientific advice process for application is because this is your starting point. When you want to apply for a SOAP CTCG pilot case, you put your application through IRIS. Next slide, please. But there are a few additional extra things you need to do as well. We need to have a request to join the pilot and a justification. So to request participation in the pilot, we're asking you to put this additional information, which is in the blue box on the side here, into the submission notes section in the IRIS application. So please tell us that you want to be admitted to the pilot, and also which trial that you're talking about here. What is the trial that you want the advice on? So we know so that it's clear to us. We ask you to tell us again the proposed reporting member state, the proposed concerned member states of this trial, and then to include your justification, the scientific issues, the public health impact, other factors. And these are the things that I referred to above previously in terms of the criteria to join the pilot and the cases for the issues for prioritization. So this will help us to have all this information in one place to hand. I think we'd also like the likely date for the EU clinical trial application for your trial. So again, we can see and place this in context to when the trial will be and when it is likely to start. Next slide, please. So here you have a couple of screenshots from IRIS. So this is what you as applicants will see when you're creating your IRIS application. And on the left-hand side, when you've got to the bit about the submission form, so you've done all the steps up to this, but when you see the submission form, there is a section highlighted submission notes. And when you go in here, you'll see a box. And this is where we are asking you to put in those bits of information for the justification and the information about the proposed reporting member states and so on. And when you've completed this, then that's when you get the green tick at the end of it. Okay, there are in your application on IRIS, ultimately all of these sections will need to be addressed. But this is where you put the submission notes for the justification and the request to be included in the pilot. Next slide. Okay, we also want you to put in IRIS the information about the clinical trial. So in the section in IRIS on procedural information, that's where you can put in trial numbers, if you know what they are, and the planned countries for your trial. In your dossier for submission, we would like you to put in an advanced mature clinical trial protocol, if you have it, or a draft synopsis of the protocol in case you're at an earlier stage for the trial development. And also the investigator's brochure is considered a very useful document. So you have the IRIS information, you have the annexes to the dossier, but also you will have your draft briefing document and with the question and applicant's position format. We have a scientific advice procedure briefing document template, which you will need to use. And you have already heard about the submission deadlines. And everything that I say applies to both scientific advice or protocol assistance, which protocol assistance being orphan designated products for rare diseases. Next slide. So these are two screenshots to give you more information from the applicant's perspective about what you see in IRIS when you are looking for the procedural information where you enter this clinical trial in related information. So in that little orange box on the slide, you see a heading procedural information, and in part of the procedural information, then it will ask you about adding countries or adding CETIS numbers or UDRA-CT numbers, and that's what we're asking you to complete if they exist already for your trial. Next slide, please. Fees, there's not much to say more about fees here, except that normal scientific advice fees and fee incentives apply. Next slide. Okay, I want to go on to the process now. Next slide. So what I'm giving you in the next couple of slides, this slide and the next slide, it's only two, is quite a high level perspective on the process. I'm not giving you a full SOP, swim chart, swim lanes and everything, but the main things that I want to convey to you today. So taking from the start, you go and there's an applicant, you make your submission with your justification for the pilot, and then it will enter the validation phase, which is approximately 30 days. Now, in this validation phase, if you have requested admission to the SOAP and CTCG pilot, these cases, these requests will be accumulated, and we will look at those. And there will be a teleconference with the SOAP and CTCG chairs. And as a result of this teleconference, there will be a decision which pilot case will be selected amongst any submissions requests that have been made. If you have asked to be a pilot case, but you have not been selected during this validation phase, then the automatic result would be that you would then transition to a to a standard scientific advice or protocol assistance procedure within the same submission slot, and that would not affect any timelines. Otherwise, then it would carry on. Now, if you are admitted to the scientific advice pilot procedure, then the next slide will give more information about what happens. During the validation process, if you are selected to the pilot, we will take a few additional steps in terms of the appointment of SOAP coordinators. So for all cases in scientific advice during the validation phase, we do appoint the 2 scientific advice working party delegates as coordinators. In the case of pilot for the SOAP CTCG cases, we will be making an appointment of SOAP coordinators, but we will take account of the proposed reporting member states and proposed concerned member states. And so that's why it's important that you tell us and give us these pieces of information. And as you would normally expect during a validation phase, we will also continue to give validation comments on the draft dossier and the completeness of the dossier. So next slide, please. So this slide gives an overview, again, at a high level, of the remainder of the procedure in the assessment phase. So if we start in the top left-hand corner, going into the blue boxes with the down arrow, so then it's an evaluation phase. And the point here to make is that there will be an interaction with clinical trial assessors and the CTCG assessors roundtable built into the process. As we go down slide, the first reports will be generated and the SOAP coordinator team will interact with the clinical trial assessors. There will also be an engagement with the clinical trial, the CTCG assessors roundtable. And then we will have a discussion of the first reports at the SOAP plenary. And if we carry along the arrows at the bottom, at the plenary SOAP meeting, there is a decision whether or not a discussion meeting is needed. If it is needed, we'll go around the green loop. If it isn't needed, we'll continue at the bottom of the slide and the joint report will be drafted. The interaction with the clinical trial assessors is also built in throughout the process. And then we will finalize the letters. And then we have the orange boxes where the final advice letters are finalized and sent to the CHMP and to the member states. And the consolidated advice letter is sent to the applicant. Next slide. So you may be wondering now, when will I find out if my request to join the pilot is successful? We will inform you before the end of the normal validation period for scientific advice whether or not your request has been admitted to the pilot. And in terms of the process, as you can see, we will follow the standard scientific advice submission deadlines and timelines, but we will build into it this additional interactions within this timelines and procedure. Next slide. Now, to be fully transparent with applicants, we have been surveying which member states will take part, and this is the results of the survey. So a questionnaire to the member states via the Clinical Trial Coordination Group was sent asking if member states were willing to join the pool of member states willing to voluntarily participate in the SOAP CTCG pilot, giving the member states perspective. And this was and whether as a proposed reporting member state or a concerned member state. And you can see in the graph here, we have participation rate of 2/3, so 67% are willing to take part. And this is the information that is current. We are also continuing to follow up further for further information and further responses. And we will provide further information in due course. This is what we can tell you at the moment. Thank you. Next slide. In terms of the outcome of the pilot procedure, so at the end of the advice procedure, you will receive a scientific advice or protocol assistance letter with consolidated scientific content. So the scientific answers will include the views integrated from the MAA and the CTA perspective. There is a section and other comments letter, and this may include any particular member state specific comments. As for normal scientific advice from CHMP and SOP, scientific advice is not legally binding, but applicants should justify any divergence from the advice received in the case of a formal clinical trial application or marketing authorization application. And also, this scientific advice does not constitute pre-assessment of the data for CTA and MAA in the European Union. So throughout this procedure, we are aiming to help you best prepare for these marketing authorization or clinical trial application. It does not guarantee the outcome, but trying to give you the best opportunity and to look at identify the critical issues that you need to take into account when you're preparing and looking at your draft clinical trial designs. Next slide, please. In terms of confidentiality, we are following the normal procedures as outlined in the EMA policy document, and also for confidential and competing interests. Next slide. Next slide. So in terms of evaluation of the pilot, we will be asking applicants who have been admitted to the pilot to complete a questionnaire soon after the completion of your procedure. And you will be asked about the benefits in terms of the immediate efficiency, in terms of the harmonized views, and also your perception of how this will benefit you downstream. And we ask you to do this timely, and it will help us all to evaluate the benefits of the pilot. Next slide. So how many pilot procedures? One case a month for 10 months, maybe with some flexibility depending on capacity. Next slide. So that's it from the SOAP CTCG procedure. And I hope now you have a better idea of these areas in terms of the scope and how to apply and the process. Okay, thanks very much, Jordanis.
Thank you very much, Jane. That was very detailed, very informative. So thanks a lot. I'm sure a lot of people will have a much better understanding now how the pilot would work. And without any further delay, let's go directly into the Q&A session. And I have the pleasure to introduce to you Massimiliano Sara, sitting next to me. He's a national expert from the Italian Medicines Agency, working for the EMA. For the next couple of years, and he will be a key person in both the pre-CTA and the CTCG, sub-CTCG pilot. So Massimiliano, over to you.
Thank you. Good afternoon to everyone. Well, we have received several questions. We have received some questions before the webinar, and during the webinar we have now receiving a lot of questions. So we try to keep all the questions now, but for time being it will be not possible to reply to everyone. But I want to reassure about this, because we will keep open the Slido for until next Friday. So you can also make additional questions, and we will try to reply and publish a Q&A document after the webinar, trying to reply to all your questions. I can also give you at the end of the meeting, at the end in the slides, I can also give you an email address that you can use to make additional questions. So without wasting other time, I'm just going through the question that you made. Well, first one, I would like to pick up this question. This has been received before the starting of the webinar, so I think we can go the priority to these questions. And the guideline indicates that process will follow standard SOAP process with exception of additional CTCG related interaction. Could you give us an estimation of expected delay to get the final advice? I would hand over this question to Jane.
Yes, to be succinct, we're not expecting any additional time length delay to be added on to the normal procedure. So we would expect the 40-day, 70-day, and we expect everything to be tied up in that. Exceptionally, if there is an additional delay needed, we would obviously contact you, but that is not the expectation. Thank you.
Thank you, Jane. I would go through this question. Also, this question has been arrived before the webinar. How will the new approach contribute to a more continuous scientific advice for developers by keeping the knowledge on the advice given and maintain continuity of regulators involved in scientific advice over time? I would ask to Jane to reply, but also to Paolo and Marianne to complement on this. Thank you.
Yes, thanks very much. Within the scientific advice community, we are very mindful of what we call horizontal and vertical consistency. So we do maintain a reservoir of scientific advices, and then we do adhere to consistency and check those. So that's what I can say from the scientific advice consistency perspective. Thanks.
Yeah, but I think that it's really nothing to add on that, on top of what Jane already explained. We try to be consistent, and I can only think that this is an improvement in that perhaps the fact that we may interact also between those who look at marketing authorization and those who look at clinical trial application, and this could improve the consistency also across these different remits, as I said before, acknowledging the independence and the respective remits, but I can only see a benefit in that regard.
Yeah, if I may, I would like to put more emphasis on the revolutionary part of the story, because already before we were trying to be consistent by having the information about previous scientific advice available when the clinical trial applications came in. But the revolutionary aspect here is that we are sitting together, we are discussing together, and hopefully by doing so for a longer period of time, perhaps going beyond the pilot, we might be in a position to even align our views or understand each other views better. So I think it's really it adds value from my perspective, from just striving for consistency more to aligning views, I would say. Thank you.
Thank you, Marianne. Thank you, Paolo. Well, we have another question that is really interesting, but perhaps we can reply after the pre-CTA description, because touched both pilots. So can you please differentiate those two pilots versus the SNSA phase 2? I think that we can reply after this, but I would like to pick up another question that received a lot of positive feedback from the audience. There are several pediatric questions that are out of scope for SOAP procedures. Are there similar restrictions for these pilots when the questions are on pediatric trials? I would ask to Jane to reply. Thank you.
I think I will start, but I would also ask Jordanis as head of office to complement as well. So we understand, and we have talked to the PDCO chair and secretariat and understand the importance of the issues from pediatrics and the need to also interact with TCG and member state colleagues on clinical trials. So we will certainly endeavour to do our best to facilitate any, the complex clinical trials with pediatric involvement. And we would be looking really to see the questions that are in scope of the scientific aspect and the scientific remit that is normally operational within the SOP. But I would ask Jordanis maybe to complement things.
Yes, thank you, Jane. As many of the audience might know, we have been in discussions with applicants from industry about the scope of pediatric scientific advice and the fact that certain questions are out of scope. We've been trying to also introduce some flexibility in very specific cases. I think that this can definitely be one of those cases. We're talking about one procedure per month, so definitely in this pilot phase we can try to because it comes down the issue comes down to the capacity and the involvement of the PDCO. So as Jane mentioned, proactively the PDCO has been approached, in an attempt to try to engage them certainly in this towards provision of a consolidated view, not just from the SOP CHMP and a clinical trial national competent authorities, but also from the PDCO side. So this is definitely a case where we could try to introduce a little bit more flexibility. Thank you.
Thank you, Jordanis. Well, going ahead fast, sorry to be so fast, but the questions are we receive a large amount of questions and I would like to reply as much as possible to all the questions. So, is a different set of questions expected in the briefing document addressing both SOAP and CTCG perspectives, or is the expectation to look into the questions in a joint manner? This is a real relevant point, and I would like to Jane and also to Marianne to complement in the case. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Marianne, you've switched on your camera. Do you want to go first?
Unmute as well if I want to interact. No, just very quickly, we had an internal discussion just today about what our expectations are towards differentiation versus in a holistic approach, and potentially it might be an advantage if you indicate where you are seeking additional emphasis for the clinical trials colleagues to take a look at. But what we took away from our current discussion was rather that we would expect to look at the same questions both. But I repeat, if there is a special emphasis, a special need for where you want to have specifically the CTCG or the member states perspective, then please point it out to us.
Nothing to add there. Thanks. Back to you, Massimiliano.
Just to add, perhaps that the same is, of course, for the SOAP. There might be a question that might be for the SOAP and not for the CTCG. It makes sense to have this anyway. For instance, single pivotal or something like that, that makes sense. Perhaps it's more for a question for the SOAP perspective to the marketing authorization. And so in a way, there might be some question targeting more one or the other, but yeah, the aim would be to have a reply that takes both views into account.
Thank you to all. Well, I would take another couple of questions, and we have received a very burning question. Okay. Sorry. Sorry, I can't find it. Yeah, here. So, sorry for the delay. Why do you think applicants are willing to add up to 140 days fee and scientific advice procedure to the startup timeliness for a clinical trial? Well, I think that it's good to reply to this question just to clarify the timeline of the sub-CTCG procedure. Thank you. I would ask to Jane to reply.
Yeah, thanks very much. So in short, scientific advice with the SUB is a voluntary procedure, and we do have no shortage of applicants seeking scientific advice anyway. So really, it's up to you if you want to pursue a scientific advice procedure, and we will involve, we'll work together with the CTCG if possible, if you've requested it and you're selected in the pilot. And we have the validation period, which is as short as possible for us. And we also have, the assessment phase, which is proportionate in terms of the assessment, and with or without a discussion meeting where needed. So I don't see, additional burden above and beyond what the current situation is. Paolo, over to you.
No, I would like to comment that to me, now there is this option, and you can take into account this option in advance of if you plan to submit an application, say on February, you can plan to seek for advice in a time that fits with your aim to submit the clinical trial application in that date. So it's not about delaying, it's about planning earlier if you're willing to have an interaction with us. So the other way around, I would say. It's an additional option that you have. If you want to use, we are here.
Perhaps if I may add, it might be advantageous for the sponsor or for the applicant to clarify regulatory or scientific complexities before the submission, in order to avoid a large number of questions during the procedure itself, when the time to respond is rather limited. So it's more ideally you could even avoid questions during the procedure, which is, I have to admit, very rarely the case. But on the other hand, it will make your life easier during the response timelines to successfully respond to all questions raised, if the complexities are taken away outside of the strict procedural timelines. Thank you.
So thank you to all. Well, I think that we can take just a couple of questions, and then we have to go ahead with the pre-CTA. So, what is the standard protocol assistant? What is standard protocol assistant program in case not accepted for combined advice? I would ask to Jordanis to reply.
So, as Jane mentioned, a protocol assistant is scientific advice for orphan medicinal products. We give it a different name we have given it a different name because you can ask additional questions relating to the orphan designation. That's all there is to it. Otherwise, the process is exactly the same. So there's no difference in processing timelines compared to scientific advice. Protocol assistance requests, as long as they fulfill the criteria, will be also eligible for the sub-CTCG advice. So they could also be part of the pilot. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jordanis. We can take the last question, and then we'll try to reply to the other question in a written manner. Is it right assumption that combination IMP itself will not be a disqualifying criteria for sub-CTCG advice, only if there is a complexity directly related to the device component or any trial with the AGAMP in prefilled syringe is out? Yes, would ask to Jordanis to reply also to this question, and perhaps to Jane to complement just in case. Thank you.
So the assumption is right. As long as you don't ask device questions, combination IMP is definitely eligible for the pilot. So it's really the complexity of having to involve medical device expertise in the assessment that we would like to avoid, at least initially, okay? Because we have a process for scientific advice. We are complicating it now with the involvement of CTCG. We didn't want to complicate it further with adding, the medical device expertise in the mix. So, but otherwise, if you don't ask those questions, yes, you can come for scientific advice. You could be eligible for the pilot. If we're talking about the combination IMP. Thank you.
Thank you, Jordanis. And so I think that we can go ahead. So please, Jordanis.
Okay, so thank you very much for the very stimulating questions. And as Massimiliano said, we're going to collect these and try to reply to them in writing afterwards. And the slide will also remain open for quite a while for you to submit additional questions. But it's now time to go to the second pilot and hear more details about it. And we have the pleasure to have with us Monique Al, who works at the CCMO, the Dutch agency responsible for approving clinical trials. Monique is also the other CTCG co-chair, and she's going to tell us all about the pre-CTA advice. So Monique, the word over to you.
Thank you, Jordanis, and good day to everybody, and welcome to the second part of the webinar, which is about the pre-CTA advice pilot, which is managed by the CTCG. So here also an overview of what's the pre-CTA advice about. Well, first of all, it's important to mention that it's a technical or regulatory advice, so not a scientific advice, and an advice before the submission of the clinical trial application. The advice procedure will be a short timeline, fully written procedure in general, and within 30 days the advice should be delivered. Applications for the pre-CTA advice will go through the entry point of the SNSA procedure, and you can see the email address where you can submit the request for the pre-CTA advice. The lead member state for the pre-CTA advice is the only member state who will issue a fee. A single fee will, and based on the reduced scope of the advice. And the evaluation of the pilot will be done at iterations of 5 pre-CTA advices. Okay, next slide. It has been said before by Marianne and also by Paola. I think Jane, Jordanis, we all said it, that we really see it as a new opportunity for advice for the applicants. What is the pre-CTA pilot? Well, the pilot provides consolidated technical regulatory advice to applicants before the submission of a clinical trial application in the clinical trial information system. And the pilot is coordinated by the Clinical Trial Coordination Group, the CTCG, with the involvement of the clinical trial assessors from the national competent authorities. And what's the novelty? So before this pilot, applicants could only receive technical and or regulatory support at the national level from the member state evaluating the application. And with the pre-CTA advice, we aim to provide a consolidated view of the member states concerned on the pre-submission topics. And the scope of this pilot covers a number of areas, such as advice on regulatory aspects of low intervention clinical trial status and submission of trials with decentralized elements or complex design. Next slide. What are the expected benefits of the pre-CTA advice? So from an applicant perspective, the benefit is that you receive support prior to the clinical trial application. And more important, I think, that it is a harmonized opinion from all the member states concerned. And also, I think that short timelines, I just saw the question, why should I wait 140 days? Well, we aim of managing it all within 30 days written procedure. So what's the benefit for assessors and NCAs? The benefit is, of course, the coordinated assessment of complex regulatory issue that is not done on a single basis on a national level, but that we really coordinate and consolidate our advice on the topics being addressed. And advantage is that we will come up with an aligned position before the clinical trial is submitted in CTIS. And another advantage from our perspective, from the member state perspective, is that within the request brought forward, there could be issues, topics where we think, okay, these are really topics which need more guidance. So it could also develop the result in development of guidances or updating Q&As or issued recommendation papers, reflection papers, whatsoever. So I think this is also a learning exercise for both parties. And at the end, the final goal is to have complete and high quality dossiers, which might facilitate the clinical trial assessment. Next slide, please. So we have issued a survey to ask the member states who are willing to participate in the pre-CTA advice pilot. We have 30 member states in the European Union, European Economic Area, and 25 member states responded. 90 member states indicated they are willing to participate. 3 member states don't know yet, and another 3 member states said, no, we can't participate right now. And the reason for this was primarily from those 6 member states who not immediately say yes. The reason was really a capacity issue. So they do support the pilot, but they don't have the resources to contribute in a significant way. And this is also a little bit reflected in the next question when we asked which role can you take as a member state in the pre-CTA pilot? Can you be the reporting member state role as well as the member state concerned role? So if you're a reporting member state, then you should also take the lead in the pre-CTA advice. Well, from the 90 member states indicated to be willing to participate in the pilot, 12 indicated, yes, we can do both. We can take the lead and we can also participate as a member state concerned. And 7 indicated only as a member state concerned. Also because they had some concerns with respect to their resources. But after all, we think this is not a bad result. And it's also not set in stone. This is something which can change over time, and the list will be regularly be updated. Next slide. Here an overview of the topics which are within the scope of the pre-CTA advice pilot. So first of all, it could be a question, well, I think the most frequently asked question we receive in the Netherlands, does my study fall within the scope of the clinical trial regulation? This could be a topic, is my clinical trial considered a low intervention clinical trial? The third one, which is mentioned here, is really on procedural aspects if you have a combined study. So if you have a study where more than one legislation is applicable, so CTR together with NDR or CTR with IVDR, then it's also possible to come for pre-CTA advice. Operational aspects of the submission of the clinical trial application in the clinical trial information system, for instance, on complex clinical trial or on transition clinical trials. Regulatory advice on the GLP guideline. This guideline has been recently published on the CTCD website. The same for the recommendation paper on the auxiliary medicinal product, which is published on Lex Volume 10. We can also provide regulatory advice. The other one is the recommendation paper on the use of decentralized elements in clinical trials, also published on the Lex Volume 10, where we can also provide regulatory advice. And then if sponsors are considering to have a risk-based approach in the conduct of the clinical trial, for instance, reduce safety reporting, it's also possible to include this as part of your pre-CTA advice. There could also be open questions which you want to discuss before submitting your after you want to do a resubmission of your updated dossier. So this is in case you have submitted already your clinical trial in CTIS, but for whatever reason the clinical trial was withdrawn, or you didn't manage to cope within the timelines, and you have to resubmit, and you still have some open questions before you want to do your resubmission, and it is on regulatory or technical aspects. This could also fit within the scope of the pre-CTA advice pilot. And we have an open mind, so there could be regulatory or technical aspects not foreseen in this list, and we are open to consider this. Next slide, please. So when you submit your pre-CTA advice request, of course, it will be assessed if it falls within the scope of the pre-CTA advice pilot, and if there are any questions, for instance, on scientific aspects of the clinical trials, or there are questions better suited for other advice procedures, we will channel this. Not ourselves, we will inform you which other procedure might be more suitable for these questions. And again, we want to emphasize that this advice procedure is not a pre-assessment of the clinical trial application. Next slide. So there are some prerequisites before you can apply. Not before, when you are applying. What I already said, the application should be done via the SNSA entry point. There is an application form I will show you in the next slide. There is a validation period of the application is within the scope, and if not, defer to other advice services. You should not include any scientific questions in this pre-CTA advice. We accept a maximum of 5 questions within each application, and also you already should have an already mature protocol. Maybe good to mention that we do also accept, of course, pre-CTA advices on ongoing clinical trials where you do have a mature protocol. But if it's if you consider it a new clinical trial application, then also the protocol should be rather mature. And you should know the proposed RMS and the member state concerned for this clinical trial application. Next slide. So this is the application form for the pre-CTA advice. You start with the SNSA application form, the front page, where on this page you can immediately indicate if it's for an SNSA procedure or for the pre-CTA advice procedure. You see it on the left page on this slide. And then if it's a pre-CTA advice, you go to the last 2 pages of this application form, where you first indicate some administrative information. Who is the applicant, the company, are you commercial or academic, contact details, all those kind of things. And then you can indicate the scope of the pre-CTA advice. And as you can see, what I just said about our open mind, if you have another question on regulatory or technical aspects, there's an open text field where you can indicate what your question is about. And then finally, you mentioned who is the proposed reporting member state and the member state concerned. If you already have a trial number, an EU clinical trial number, please include it in here. And you can indicate which documents will be submitted in addition to this application form. And please click twice now, the one who is managing this, because then something appears. Yep. So it's important to indicate the proposed reporting member state, because this member state is requested to take the lead in the pre-CTA advice. And finally, a comment with the documentation. We don't have any mandatory requirements with respect to the documents to be updated, but of course the documents should be supportive to the questions addressed. If you have an initial application, a new initial application which you want to submit in a certain time period, then of course you should submit also the protocol, even though it might not already be the final version, but included. But if it's on an ongoing clinical trial, we do of course have the clinical trial protocol in our system, so then you don't have to submit it. But please take care that the documentation is complete for the member state to be able to answer your questions posed. Next slide. So here an overview of the timelines, a rather high level overview. So once you have submitted your application via the SNSA entry point, it will be received by the SNSA coordinating a unit. And this unit has 2 working days to also look at the application, and they can present their view if they think it is within the scope or the pre-CTA pilot, or maybe within the scope of SNSA or another one. So this perspective from the SNSA coordination unit is forwarded to the pre-CTA coordinator and taking into account when the formal validation phase starts at day 0. And the SNSA coordination unit is the unit who sent an email acknowledge the receipt of the request. So then the validation phase starts, 7 calendar days. It could be that the pre-CTA coordinator thinks that the application is not complete, that the information is missing, either in the application form or in the documentations submitted. Then there could be a request for further information. In that case, there will be a clock stop, and the clock starts ticking again once we have received the additional information. But if there is not any a request for further information, you're received within the 7 calendar days whether the request falls within the scope and also the timetable, and the lead member state is confirmed. And of course, if it's not within scope, you will also receive an email with the information that your application is being rejected, and if you might better go with the application to another services for advice. So when the validation phase is finalized and your application, your request is within the scope of the pre-CTA pilot, then the assessment phase started. It has a timeline of 30 calendar days. The lead member state is responsible for drafting the advice. There will be around 12 days max to draft the advice, but at least it should be available 3 days in advance before the CTG has her weekly assessor roundtable meeting. CTG CTG members or assessors, for clinical trial assessors, also non-clinical or quality assessors, meets every week. And there will be a dedicated slot in this assessor roundtable to discuss the pre-CTA advice, the draft pre-CTA advice as presented by the lead member state. Also, during the assessment phase, there could be a request for information. Then also there is a clock stop. Is there not any clock stop, then the timelines continue. depending on the outcome of the discussion at this assessor roundtable slot, the lead member state will consolidate the comments received, come with a pre-final, pre-CTA advice, which will be circulated to the member states concerned for any blocking comments, and the member state concerns have 5 days to respond if there are any blocking comments. And depending on that, of course, if there are really blocking comments that might need a second meeting, but if not, the advice will be finalized by the lead member state, and the final advice letter will be sent to the applicant within the 30 calendar days. Okay, thank you. Next slide. So just an overview of all the communications between the different parties and the applicants. So again, confirmation of receipt. This will be sent by the SNSA coordination unit. And this will also be the start of the validation phase. The validation notification sent by the pre-CTA coordinator. And this will include the acceptance of the pre-CTA request, the name of the lead member states, and the timetable. The pre-CTA advice itself, this letter will also be sent by the pre-CTA coordinator. And in this advice, the questions posed by the applicant will be addressed. During the procedure, there could be a request for additional information, and this will also be handled by the pre-CTA coordinator, but only if there are any requests for additional information. And it is a full written procedure, and meetings are only taking place in exceptional cases. Next slide, please. So there is a template of the pre-CTA advice. Once you have sent in a request, you'll see the template, but I want to point out there with the yellow arrow that as for any other advice, whether it's scientific, regulatory, or technical, there is a disclaimer with respect to the advice that it is an advice and there can always be new information available at the time of the application, which might result in another opinion. But just that you are aware of it. Okay, next slide. After the applicant has received the pre-CTA advice letter, the applicant may request further clarification, and it can be done via email. So if you received the advice and you think, well, it's not yet fully clear what is meant by this and this and this, please send an email, ask for further clarification to the pre-CTA coordinator, and this will be handled by the lead member state to clarify. And if needed, but only in exceptional cases, there might be a possibility for a meeting. But if not, this will also be handled via email. And so this is this can only take place once, so you can have one clarification, and it's not accepted if you pose this new question. So it's only clarifications on the comments by the CCG on your questions for your first application. Thank you. Next slide. And during the pilot phase of the pre-CTA advice, fees are foreseen to be raised by the lead member states, and this will be done according to national requirements and following national procedures. Next slide. The same as for the CCD swap pilot and for any other scientific advice procedures, we follow standard European advice procedures with normal principles of confidentiality and handling of conflicts of interest, if there are any. Next slide. So the evaluation of the pilot, during the initial pilot phase, iterations of pre-CTA advice procedures will be followed by an evaluation step leading to procedural optimization if needed. Applicants will be asked to complete a questionnaire on the quality and procedures of the pre-CTA advice, and the results will be used to analyze if the objectives of the pilot has been achieved. And currently, the end of this pilot phase is foreseen to be end of this year. But yeah, and then will be decided will we go on with this pilot or not. So it's not set in stone that it will be the final date, but for now it's quarterly 4 in 2025. Oh, that's next year. Sorry, I made a mistake. Quarterly 3, 2025. Anyway, we will evaluate at that time and consider if a continuation of the pilot is necessary, or that we make it a formal procedure ending the pilot and have it in a fixed place. Or if we see that it has no benefit at all, we completely stop any actions in this respect. Next slide. So what is the state of play? The number of applications so far, we have received 4 requests for the pre-CTA advice. All requests were related to complex clinical trial / platform trials applications. We have finalized 2 requests already, and they have all been finalized within the 30 calendar days, and 2 requests are still ongoing. Next slide. So what are the experience so far? Well, the validation timeline can be challenging if the proposed RMS cannot be the lead member state. The role of the SNSA coordination unit in the validation process needs more clarification, but that's more internal, I have to say. The timeline of the 30 days for the written procedure advice is manageable based on the experience so far. There has been a broad involvement of the member state concerned when drafting the advice, so that's also a positive thing. There was no need for any request for additional information during the process by the lead member state. In both procedures which have been finalized, there was a clarification email from the sponsors. Clarifications have been provided by the lead member state, and we received no further request or whatever from the sponsors. And also there was not any need for a clarification meeting or a meeting during the advice procedure. Next slide. And now it's time for answering some Q&As on the pre-CTA pilot. Thanks for your attention.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Monique, for this detailed presentation. And I guess by now everybody should be quite familiar with both pilots. Time to go to questions. We have received quite a few questions in the slide on the pre-CTA. So the word over quickly to Massimiliano to give us some of these questions.
Thank you, Jordanis. Well, yes, we have received some large amount of questions also on pre-CTA. This is very much appreciated because this means that we have given a very good signal outside. Well, I would like to go through the questions, giving priority to those that have received more feedback from the audience, and this is the one the one that have received the most number of feedback. Since ethics committee involvement in pre-CTA would be limited, and the reporting member states might not be involved, how should the sponsor proceed if the RMS and or ethics committee raise RFIs that disagree with the pre-CTA advice? Should sponsor push back? I would ask to Monique to reply, but also to Marianne to complement. Thank you.
Thank you for this question. There are different elements in this question. First of all, I want to mention that although the ethics committee have not a formal place in the pre-CTA pilot, so they are not having a position that they can they can contribute, but it's not a standard step in the whole pre-CTA procedure. But the member state can decide for them own if they think it might be better to involve them, and then if it all fits within the timelines, then it's fine to do so. And I can tell you that for one of the advices on the complex clinical trial, ethics committees, an ethics committee, I have to say, has been involved, so that they were informed about the draft of the pre-CTA advice and also on the final pre-CTA advice, and they had no comments at all. So they were informed. Then finally, there could always be situations, even if the RMS is the lead member state, that the outcome would be different during when the final application is received in CTIS. So I think that's, I already mentioned the disclaimer. So anyway, I don't think that the fact that the RMS or the ethics committees are not participating would be a great problem, because the questions we are addressing in the pre-CTA pilot are primarily regulatory and procedural. So anyway, I don't expect, but we will monitor, of course, this. Whether you could push back, I think you can only push back if it's justified. And it's also, on the other hand, it should also be justified by the RMS if they decided differently than in the pre-CTA advice. But that would be my answer. Not a general pushback, just be clear on that. Marianne.
Thank you, Monique. No, nothing really to add. I think you said it already. If given the completer context, so to say, of the full submission package, you have a different view of a question that has been discussed before, with a limited availability of information or based on a limited set of documentation, then this might be a reason for a different point of view. And perhaps just on the specific role of the RMS in a clinical trial application, given the fact that if the RMS is negative on the part 1, for example, then this has implications for all, so to say. It will always be our goal to have the RMS in a leading role for the advice given. So at least this will make sure that that there will be a good view on the part 1 before the submission goes in, again with the limitation or with the caveat that Monique has raised on the fact that seeing the full picture, there might be a different view, which is always the case for every advice, I would say. Thank you.
Correct, yeah. And maybe a point to be made, but we have to see, of course, we have just started a pilot. We have now experience from 2 completed requests, so it's much too early to conclude on anything. But we really aim at having a broad involvement of all member states concerned. So it's really a consolidated, endorsed, advice also by the member state concerned. And from the previous 2 we had, there was a broad involvement. So why I'm saying this, so that it's not the RMS who decides on its own. That's the point I want to make. It's RMS together with the member state concerned. So, or the lead member state together with the member state concerned for the pre-CTA advice. Thank you.
Thank you, Monique. Thank you, Marianne. I think that you were very clear in your response. But now it's time to reply to the questions that we have left behind before, because now we have the division of both pilots. So can you please differentiate those 2 pilots versus the SNSA phase 2? I would ask to everyone to reply by perhaps starting from Monique, but then Jane, but also Marianne, if she wants to complement, and Paolo, and so on. Thank you.
Yeah, I think for the pre-CTA advice pilot, the scope is differently. We are focusing on regulatory, technical, procedural questions, and not any scientific questions. And scientific questions are addressed in the pilot CTCG swap and also in the SNSA. So this was my answer for the reflection from the pre-CTA pilot.
Yes.
Yeah, perhaps if I may take over just very briefly and completely oversimplified. If you have a regulatory question, it's the pre-CTA advice. If you are in a rather early stage of your development program involving perhaps only a few member states, then the logical consequence would be to go for SNSA. And if you are further down the road, closer to the marketing authorization application, or if you are already thinking of the future marketing authorization application in many member states, perhaps, then the logical candidate would be the SOAP advice or SOAP CTCG advice, whatever is then the preference later on. Thank you.
Yes, and also from the scientific advice working party side, I would probably invite Paolo maybe to comment on this one, but my views would align with Marianne. Yeah, thanks.
No, but I guess that Marianne explained, and I guess that in the mapping perhaps it's written in a more detailed, but anyway, there's no overlapping, and or might be some overlapping, but the message from Marianne was clear. In the early phases with few member states, perhaps it makes sense to go for SNSA when it comes to questions regarding centralized marketing authorization procedure and a late stage and the pivotal studies to support that. There is make more sense to go for a centralized procedure, and then there is the option also to have this consolidated advice, including also the CTCG and the clinical trial perspective. I guess that's it.
Thank you. Thank you to all. Well, we have another question that is really interesting and really practical. What would happen if no member state agrees to lead and or participate in any CTA advice, pre-CTA, SNSA, or combined? I would like to Monique and Marianne to reply. Thank you.
Well, here's mentioned in any CTA advice, pre-CTA, SNSA, or combined. Okay. First of all, we are collecting information on the member states who are willing to take the role of the reporting member state in the pre-CTA advice, or only the role of the member state concerned. And we hopefully can publish this if agreed soon, because that gives transparency to the applicant, so that you do know which member state will never take the lead, because we know it already up front. I think this is important information. But if there is a member state who will never take the lead or participate in any CTA advice, well, so nothing will happen with this member state, if that's the question. I mean, but it will, of course, be disappointed if you turn it around that we can't find any member state to take the lead. So suppose we can receive a pre-CTA advice and none of the member states can take the lead. Then we have to decline the request, and that will be very unfortunate. I sincerely hope that it will not come so far, but we can't exclude it. Anything else to add?
No, thank you, Monique. And I think this is a very good clarification that you're giving, that the details on which member states are participating and which aren't will not remain a black box for you. We are currently updating the information with the member states who gave initial response. asking them if they want to update their initial intervention and if they are happy to publish the information on the website. And then we will publish further details. I think that's the most relevant information here. Thank you.
Thank you. Let's go ahead. For the pre-CTA advice, is there a specific briefing document needed, or is it sufficient to provide some context together with the list of questions, as the focus is on regulatory technical questions only? This is a real practical question as well. So I would like to ask to Monique to reply.
Yeah, we don't have a specific briefing document. It really depends a little bit on the type of questions. What I said so far, it was only all the questions posed are on complex clinical trial submissions. What is really helpful if the applicant provides his opinion or his preference. This time it was many times about how to submit in CTIS if this and this and this and this is the case, or what to do if that changes. All those kind of questions, also with the complexity, of course, of CTIS, if you want to do a complex clinical trial. And so in the request received so far, the applicant made clear what their preference was, and then we can take that into account and see if it's feasible or that it's acceptable within the framework, regulatory or technical. So that is really helpful. And sometimes it's important to understand with a completely new clinical trial protocol what the concept is, which that could really be helpful answering these questions. So yeah, it's not defined upfront. But hopefully applicants do understand what is needed to address the questions properly by the member states. And if not, you will receive a request for additional information. But we can see if up till now it was manageable, just to be clear on it. But maybe we receive other types of questions where we say, okay, maybe we need more instructions for the applicant. So far there aren't. Thank you.
Thank you, Monique. Very clear reply. And I would like to ask you to reply also to the next question. That is another practical question on pre-CTA, even if this argument has been touched during your presentation, but perhaps further clarification is needed. Is it possible to ask medical ethical questions via these procedures? If so, is participation of an ethics committee from each participating member states guaranteed? What are the best practice to ensure this happens? Please, Monique, go ahead.
Yeah, it's my question is immediately what is considered medical ethical questions? It seems to go a little bit into the direction of also scientific questions with ethical aspects. So then it's not within the scope of the pre-CTA. But if it's we also have, for instance, in the DCT paper on the recommendation paper on decentralized elements, there are chapters in about informed consent procedures. These could be handled. That these could be technical, procedural. But I have to say, the ethics committee is not not involved in the pre-CTA pilot. So my answer is really, you should not pose any ethical questions in this in the pre-CTA application. But there could be questions, but I said that it might affect also ethics committee, and then it's up to the member state to decide, do I want to involve them, which I just explained. But otherwise, I think I'm not only thinking they are outside scope of the pre-CTA pilot. Sorry for a little bit confusing answer, but the question is really don't pose any medical ethical questions in the pre-CTA application. Sorry. Yeah.
Yes, thanks, Monique. So next question, where can we find the list of participating member states to the pilot? Monique.
Yeah, we've just mentioned it that we're aiming on publishing it, but it's still work in progress. So, and then this list will be published at the same page where you can find the guidances on how to apply for the SWAP CTCG pilot or how to apply for a pre-CTA advice.
So thank you, Monique. I would like to pick up this question because I think that it's important to clarify this point with the audience. The additional timelines and costs for pre-CTA advice make this unusable in the majority of cases. You may as well submit as see what your comments are. What are the benefits here? I would ask to Monique to reply, but also to Marianne to complement. This is a really important point to clarify. Thank you.
Well, I just want to use as an example the request we have received and finalized, and it was all about complex clinical trials and how to submit in CTIS. So if you do this in a wrong way, you will have a delay because then it's asked, please withdraw, resubmit, etc. So, and that will be more delay than the 30 days. Most likely than the pre-CTA advice will take. So, I do see benefits in having complete dossiers from good quality, also submitting them in the right way, which can facilitate the assessment, facilitate the validation, facilitate the assessment by the member state concerned. We foresee that might benefit, and that the 30-day waiting, 7 days validation, 37 days waiting is worthwhile. But maybe I'm a little bit not objective anymore, but let's see. Therefore, we do a pilot.
Perhaps if I may jump in, that was in fact our initial counter proposal when we were asked to come up with this pre-CTA advice concept. What would be the added value for you instead of just giving it a try and then a second try if you failed. But in fact, as Monique correctly pointed out, if you take a technical decision how to submit within CTIS, then you might in fact be blocked in a way if you decide for a concept where you, for example, in case of a complex clinical trial, and you decide to submit everything under one clinical trial number, where you will end up in certain complications where in fact it would have been much wiser to go for the multi-number concept, just as a very simple example. Then this is nothing you can correct within an already existing submission. Then you really have to withdraw and resubmit. So in a way, this might be the outstanding example where nothing can be done once the submission has gone in. And as we said during the presentation and also during the introduction, it is an opportunity for you to clarify things outside of the strict timelines, and for us also to align up front between RMS and the other member states, and also to catch points where we realize we might need to come up with guidance for future cases. Thank you.
Yeah, and if I may, so I want to give another example. That's about the AXMP and the IMPs. In the past, we had rather divergent opinions across member states on what is considered an AXMP or an IMP. And this is also very important in preparing your clinical trial application. So we have updated the recommendation paper, and And I think if you have any questions on that, I think that would also be a great opportunity to go through the pre-CTA advice, that you can receive a consolidated opinion on what is considered an AXMP or an IMP. It really differs what you have to submit in the system, how you register your product in the system. And I think these are all very beneficial aspects when you are considering submitting a clinical trial with IMPs and AXMP. Just another example. Yeah. And costs, it's also costs, but okay, because of the scope of the pilot, therefore we only ask, only if one fee is asked by the lead member state. So if you have 10 member states concerned, you don't receive 10 times a fee, just to be clear on that. And the fees will be in line with the type of advice given, so it would be fitted within the time spent on the advice. Yeah. Okay.
Thank you, Monique. Thank you, Marianne. I think that it was very important to clarify this point, and you have clarified this point very well. So going ahead, I would like to pick up 2 more questions and then go into the closing remarks. What does mature protocol mean? Is final draft acceptable, or should it be a final version that is intended to be submitted? I think that this question is for Monique. So Monique, please go ahead.
The final draft is acceptable. I think we understand what we mean by it. It doesn't have to be the final version, because there could be changes in the protocol based on the advice given. For instance, what I just as an example, the IMP, AXMP, that could also lead to changes in the protocol. So final draft is fine. And this one I can already. There's an easy answer. You can have an advice on the full set, so not one or individual trials, but of course master protocols together with sub-protocols you are intended to submit.
Yeah, so you have already replied to the next one. So
sorry, I thought we have not much time anymore.
Yeah, exactly. So we can pick up one more question and then close. Can pre-CTA advice be sought for platform protocols and CCTs?
This is the one I answered already.
Okay, sorry.
Yeah, the whole set.
Where we can find the fees? Is it the same for academic sponsor or commercial sponsor? We are an academic sponsor, so this could be important to reply as well, and then we can close.
Yeah, okay. This one is not easy to answer, because the fee system per member state is really different, and especially if you are an academic sponsor. So in some member state, you can have it's free. No fee at all. In other member states, it will be a reduced fee, but it's not a fixed percentage. It really depends on the reduction. Sorry. So we aimed of publishing this as well, but in a way that is really helpful. And this has been a challenge so far. So it is still according to the national procedures for scientific advice that might be helpful for you, but it's difficult to give an overview which is really clear and transparent because of the many different systems. And sometimes it's even not decided up front, but during the process in some member states. So, sorry to say so, but some work to be done on this aspect to publish this information.
And if I may add here, because maybe this is not just for the pre-CTA, but also for the central letter subsidy CG advice in specific. Well, the fees are what they are, but we do have a new fee regulation coming into force in January 2025, and actually it stipulates that for academic sponsors and actually for all entities that are not engaged in an economic activity, so all non-profit organizations, actually the fees for scientific advice will be free of charge as of January. So important clarification to make.
Okay, that's certainly important. Yeah.
Absolutely. So, with all this, thank you all very much, for your contributions. And I think that by now, hopefully, the audience will have like a good grip as to what these two pilots entail and what they're meant to offer. Maybe it's an opportunity at this point to juxtapose the two, just in order to see, what are the main features. So in terms of scope, importantly for pre-CTA advice, the focus is on regulatory technical questions, not scientific questions. On the other hand, the sub-CDCG scientific advice does focus on scientific aspects. So if there are clinical trial only, questions not relating to marketing authorization requirements, that are of a scientific nature, I guess SNSA might be like a better, avenue to seek advice. But this is an important difference between the two. The objective of the pre-CTA is to facilitate the clinical trial, the subsequent clinical trial application review submitted via CITES. In the case of the sub-CDCG and scientific advice, the objective is to clarify not only clinical trial but also marketing authorization application requirements. So providing a more holistic, so to speak, advice. The stakeholders in the case of the pre-CTA advice are reference and concerned member states. In the case of sub-CDCG, we have additionally the Scientific Advice Working Party, obviously, and also the CTCG as a whole beyond the reference and concerned member states. Protocol maturity is important, I would say, in both cases, perhaps a little more in the case of the pre-CTA advice, but also in the case of the sub-CDCG advice. This was also addressed in a question. I guess the idea is that these avenues for advice are meant to give you a direction in case when you're in a kind of decision point. So obviously nobody expects these protocols to be fully mature. They're always can be changes, and of course there may be changes as a result of the advice itself, as Monique clarified. Questions on devices are acceptable in the case of the pre-CTA advice. We would like to avoid this complexity for now in the case of the sub-CDCG advice. There's a limit to 5 questions in the case of the pre-CTA advice, no limit in the case of the sub-CDCG advice. A discussion meeting can be granted as per normal process in the case of the sub procedure. Only in exceptional cases it can be a possibility, but the expectation is because of the nature of the questions being technical and regulatory that this would not be needed. And it's very preliminary, but the initial experience confirms this expectation. The process is flexible in case of the pre-CTA advice, more fixed in the case of the sub-CDCG, and the timeline is very short because it's very targeted to this regulatory and technical questions to 30 days in the case of the pre-CTA advice. It's the usual 40 or 70-day procedure depending on whether there is a discussion meeting or not in the case of the sub-CDCG. The fees, once again, are as per national requirements and determined by the leading member state in the pre-CTA, who's going to be doing leading the assessment. The usual sub-scientific advice fees apply in the case of the sub-CDCG. And in terms of the number of procedures in the pilot, in the pre-CTA there will be iterations of 5 advice procedures, after each one of which there will be a review and potentially adaptations to the process. In the case of the sub-CDCG, we're going to have one pilot, expect to have one pilot case per month for a total duration of 10 months, after which there will be an assessment of the pilot. So I think that with this, hopefully, again, the specifics of each one of these pilots are clear to the audience, and everybody is very excited to participate and to submit their applications. As mentioned before, the Slido will be open until next Friday for additional questions to be submitted. The responses to the questions will be published, and I would like to thank all participants for their contribution, and all panelists for their useful remarks. And I would like also to thank Teresa and Josipa for the organizational aspects of this meeting. So I wish everyone a very good afternoon and looking forward to seeing you in the pilot.